Welcome back to another episode of Ink and Overalls. I'm Dedra, and I'm so glad that you decided to join me today. Guys, if you have liked, shared, subscribed, if you've watched or told anybody about this, anything, just know from the bottom of my heart that it really does matter. I care so much and I appreciate it so much. I know that we're all busy. I know that our time is precious. And if you are dedicating a little bit of that time to listening to me rattle on about something I love to talk about, and you're joining with me in this journey, I appreciate you so much. I just wanted to get that out of the way. I wanted to say that to be sure that you know that I see you and I appreciate you. So today's episode is predators. Guys, look, I'm not gonna lie, this is the second episode I've recorded today. So I'm kind of tired of talking. I feel like I'm huffing and puffing over here, trying to get everything out. And I just recorded this and I didn't like how I sounded, so I'm trying it again. And I didn't look like how I looked, but my hair may be a little crazier now, but I don't know. We'll see. We're going to roll with it, okay? We're just going to roll with it. So today's episode is predators. We got a question about how to predator-proof your homestead. And I wanted to address that. I wanted to talk about it. It's something that, unfortunately, I have experience dealing with. I think that most of us if we have animals long enough, we're going to probably deal with it in some capacity. You may be locked down to the point that it's never a problem for you, but I have lived in rural areas. I have lived in subdivision, and I can tell you that predators on the homestead seems to be an inevitability. You're going to have problems no matter where you are because predators are opportunistic. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can lock your chickens up every single day religiously, right at sundown, and the one day that you forget or that you're having to watch your supper and you're an hour late getting out there, those are your days that you may, I hope you don't, but those, just in my experience, are the days you walk out and see that you've had some type of predator attack on your place. Excuse me. And you were just doing what you needed to do. And you're like, how did they know the one time I don't get out here to lock them up on time, the fox comes and grabs one? Well, because they're opportunistic. They're always around. We can do things to try to keep them out there instead of coming in on us, but they are around, and they are always looking for an opportunity for an easy meal. And we just have to kind of keep that in mind. Obviously your smaller animals are going to be your most vulnerable on your place. So for the larger part of this episode, I will mostly be talking about common predators of chickens and fowl, like your ducks, things like that, and rabbits. Now, those also the places that I've had the most experience personally of loss, from predators. I have some larger livestock. I have my goats and my pigs. Pigs usually aren't too much of a problem, but for anybody, but now goats can be vulnerable. We have some systems in place, some things in place. I have not had to deal with that, thankfully. That doesn't mean I won't deal with it tomorrow. But most of my history in dealing with predators is predators of my chickens, my ducks, and rabbits, things like that. So types of predators. Now, I'm in South Mississippi. So what I deal with here may be different than what you deal with wherever you are. Smaller, as far as smaller predators that we have around here, you got raccoons, you got opossums, snakes, dogs. Dogs are a huge problem, guys. Before I say anything else, a stray dog or a neighbor's dog or even your own dog that gets out can wreak havoc on especially a flock of chickens. I have a dog personally that if she gets off leash and the chickens are out, she is going to kill one. And it's awful. And I've had almost an entire flock of chickens annihilated by a stray dog that came into my yard one day. Because dogs don't kill for food. They kill for sport. So they are just having a grand old time chasing because they love that instinct. They love to chase. And they play things down and they kill them and then they move on to the next one. Instead of whereas a raccoon or a fox or a coyote will come and take one or, sometimes two of your birds. A dog doesn't care and they'll wipe out everything. And they're the same way with rabbits. If they can get to them, they will mess with them to death. Because that's just how they are. They're not really out for the meal usually. Sometimes they may be, but they're out for sport. So Yeah, that's just my biggest problems I've ever had have been dogs around here. Hawks and other birds of prey. I've even had bald eagles be an issue. And things like skunks, foxes, coyotes. We have all that stuff around here. Now, we don't deal with larger things like wolves, cougars, mountain lions, whatever you want to call them, or like bears. There are some black bears in Mississippi, I think. I mean, there have been sightings, but there's not a huge population. It's not something that really comes across our radar. So just for the purpose of this episode, I won't be talking a whole lot about that kind of stuff. I don't have any experience dealing with it. A lot of the same principles will apply to everything, but y'all, I don't even want to think about trying to predator proof against like a mountain lion. Those things scare me to death. Y'all are rock stars if you're living somewhere where you got those. And some of you may be in a completely different, because I know I've got some people that are listening from other countries and your predators may be completely different from mine. But a lot of the same principles will still apply. So how can you tell what you're dealing with? Okay. Obviously, if you've got larger livestock that are being targeted, those predators are larger predators because a little fox is not going to go after a full-size goat. So if you're having problems with those guys, like with your larger, like your herd, you got sheep or goats that are being affected by predators. Those are going to be bigger guys. Okay. Once again, dogs are very bad about all that. They can get in there. They can aggravate them. They will kill them. They will hurt them, get them down. And then obviously things, your larger predators, the more larger predators you have, the more likely you are to have an issue. Oh yeah. We have bobcats too. Thank God we don't have cougars, but we do have bobcats. They're little, so they're not quite as scary. But we do have those around here. Okay, so how do you know what you're dealing with? Like I said, if you've got larger livestock being targeted, you're dealing with something bigger. But whenever you've got your smaller animals being targeted, it could be just about anything. So, you want to look for some signs, look for some things that may or may not lead you in the right direction of what you're dealing with. Because if you know what you're dealing with, you kind of can start to take steps to protect whatever it is that's being targeted. Now, ideally, we would all be proactive and we'd never have a problem. But if you free range your chickens, for example, you're going to probably come across, there's a likelihood that you're going to have a hawk problem. We had a hawk kill a chicken, one of our chickens, when we lived in the subdivision in Florence. I looked out and saw this huge bird and walked out, and it was too late. It had already killed. It didn't take her because it left her because I startled it, but it had already killed one of my chickens. And so like anywhere you are, they fly so they can get there. And if you free range your birds, which is a risk that you take, and it's one I take, I like for my birds to free range. And that's just something that, you're liable to be up against. So a lot of times if you have an aerial predator, you'll notice that you have birds that go missing, and you may have just like a tuft of feathers left in one area where the bird swooped down and went back up and took your bird or your whatever it was that they got. Whenever it comes to things like coyotes and foxes, in my experience, those things will come and snatch something and they will pull it into the woods. And so usually you're left with you may have quite a few feathers where that bird or whatever, I'm talking about birds in particular right now, where that bird was struck by that predator all of a sudden. And then you may have a small trail of feathers leading into the woods or from wherever that predator came from. I've had that happen, unfortunately. And so, foxes, things like that. A lot of times, y'all, if they get one, they'll be back. That's another thing to keep in mind. And so whenever you do have scares like that, like for example, if I notice that something's missing, like I have a chicken come up missing, or I have evidence that I've lost one, then I will, as a precaution, I won't let my chickens out for a few days. They all have a coop that has a run that is covered, that is totally secure with thick gauge wire, not chicken wire. I use hardware cloth or some other thick gauge. We use a 1x1 on the tops of some of our coops, and then a smaller grid on the bottom. But we make sure it's really strong because chicken wire can just be stretched. Whether it's a dog or a raccoon or whatever, they can get their hands through it. They can stretch it. They can tear it. They can tear into it. Bobcats, all those things. And so they can still get through. I've had a dog get through hardware cloth and push through it. It was a really big dog, strong dog. But, that I had on the same note, I had a coyote just a few days ago pawing and trying to get into one of my back coops, and he couldn't do it because he was smaller. He was trying to get through that hardware cloth and he couldn't. Had I had chicken wire on there, he probably could have gotten through and gotten to one of my birds. So they all have those protected places that they can stay. I prefer to let them out during the day, but if we start having a problem or if I'm feeling funny about something, they stay up for several days in a row sometimes. They've got food and water in there. They've got nesting boxes and bedding. They're fine. It's not worth the risk for me to let them out if I know we've had a predator problem. Just like I think it was last week or the week before when we had that coyote that I just was talking about. Middle of the morning, broad sunlight, coyote comes out from the perimeter and starts trying to get into a chicken coop. And so like my chickens didn't get out for 3 days at that point. And we haven't had a problem again, but I had to take precautions at that moment. And I, didn't just lay out a buffet for him by letting my chickens out. Things like your possums, your raccoons, a lot of times those will target your smaller birds, maybe your juveniles, your grow outs, and your eggs, especially like skunks love to eat eggs. Chicken snakes love to eat eggs. Possums, especially small possums, they're so bad about getting in there and stealing your eggs. Raccoons like to eat smaller birds. Possums will eat smaller birds. I've had all that happen. A lot of times a possum will kind of, this is gross, but they'll kind of, if you see a bird, like if you got evidence of a predator and that evidence is something like its stomach has been opened up kind of. A lot of times that's a possum. They like to do that. I don't know why. Raccoons like to rip heads off. So I don't know why, but that's what they do. So if you see those things, that kind of can indicate what you're dealing with. Something bigger usually doesn't leave anything behind. Like I said, your foxes, your coyotes, they're pulling it into the woods. You're going to see a trail, but you're not going to find your bird most likely unless you find it after it's done with it. Obviously, something else you can look for if you have, depending on what kind of soil you have, if it's rained recently, you've always got tracks you can look for. If you have signs in your woods of a fox den nearby, or, you can listen at night. Do you hear coyotes nearby? Do you, things like that. That's my dog. So yeah, you can look for sign, and keep your eye out. And a lot of times you can eventually kind of tell what's happening on your place. And even if you're not 100% sure, you can usually kind of rule it out. Like, oh, it's probably not an aerial predator. It's probably something coming from the wood line. Or it's definitely an aerial predator because we have a perimeter fence that I would see something come in or whatever. Being mindful, being intentional, having your eyes open is always going to be the first line of defense. So another thing I want to cover real quick is with your larger livestock. Obviously, like I already said, I said it myself, you really think of bigger predators when you think of your livestock, like your larger things. I'm speaking particularly about goats because that's what I have, and I know a lot of you have them too. But here's something to consider, guys. Whenever you have a goat who is birthing, you've got someone close to labor or a goat who is in labor, that process can attract predators because that animal becomes vulnerable to maybe even smaller predators that normally would not attempt to take that animal on. So that animal becomes vulnerable. Also, birthing is a messy process, okay? There's fluid, there's blood involved. If you've been there, you know. If not, I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. I mean, that's life. It's the same way for humans. Baby's got to get here. So that process is messy, and the scents involved with that, the sounds, all of those things can bring in predators that maybe would not normally even attempt to mess with those larger animals. Then also on top of that, you've got the young, you've got the kids, the goat kids that become a vulnerable like party in your herd to, even a hawk can take a small, like if you've ever seen a Nigerian dwarf baby, they're tiny. And a hawk could easily swoop down and get one of those. Or a raccoon could run out, a fox could run out and grab one, depending on what kind of fencing you've got. So that becomes, that's something to keep in mind. I personally try to keep my goats in the barn when they're kidding. I have had one to have babies in the paddock before because her due date was, I thought, another week out, and she decided it wasn't, and she had babies in the paddock. And so what I did then, I got them into the barn. If you don't have a barn, that's fine, because they give birth all the time out, in nature, and they're fine. But I did go to where she had them, and I like put down like hay and shavings to try to like offset any of the scents, the smells, any of that kind of stuff. And I was able to put the babies in the barn with her, which, like I said, if you don't have a barn, that's fine, but just be mindful. Think about it. It's just something you have to take into consideration at that point. It's just part of our responsibility. All right. So prevention. How can we prevent these guys from coming in on us? That's a lovely question. So how can we keep these guys from becoming a problem? How do we keep our animals safe? That's what we all want to know, right? So we've talked enough about what's out there. Let's talk about how to keep our animals safe. Obviously, like I've already stated, if you have chickens, having a safe place to lock them up at night is a first line of defense. Because a lot of their predators, with the exception of aerial predators and stupid coyotes that come out of the woods in the broad daylight, a lot of the activity happens at night. So being able, chickens naturally are going to home at night. So when it starts getting dark, they want to go where they feel safe. And if they have been trained to know that their coop is that place, then they will go back and they will roost, and you can lock them up in there. If your coop is built well, that is an excellent place to start. Okay. I already talked about the wire that we use and what I recommend. That is a good first line of defense for your flock. If you've got rabbits or anything like that, depending on how you keep them, if you keep them in wire bottom cages, I strongly recommend considering a false bottom on those cages so that anything that might get up underneath there cannot get to the rabbit to harm it. So in other words, we have a stand that holds our rabbit cages, and they got resting mats and all the things in there, but at the bottom of their cage is a wire bottom so that their droppings fall through. Well, we have a false bottom underneath them now from experience, that is basically just a wire mesh that goes across that gives about that much space between that wire and the actual wire that's the bottom of their cage. So that if something were to go up underneath there and try to like bite, nip, or pull, they can't do it, because we've had dogs come up and do that and actually pull. It's hard for me to talk about, but pull the little feet through of the rabbits, trying to get to them. And it's awful. It's horrible. And it won't happen again because we've taken precautions, but I do recommend that for them. A lot of times they're up higher, so they're not as vulnerable in a lot of ways to some of the things that you deal with, the rabbits, but a false bottom, if you're to keeping them in wire cages, I strongly recommend that. Another thing is, so for as far as hawks go, if you're running into aerial predator problems, other than keeping your chickens locked up, or in a run with a roof on it or a top, a netting, some kind like that, there's also several things you can do to like put in your trees around your house. So you can go and go to Dollar Tree, buy those little cheap like twirly bird wiggy gig things that they have that you can hang in the trees. Not wind chimes, but like the bright things that are anything that'll reflect sun, anything that kind of may look intimidating or scary hanging from the trees. Wind socks, things like that, are really good to hang from your trees. They make a mylar tape that you can buy in these big rolls. It's made out of like the same stuff as those silver balloons that you can buy that you get blown up, and you can tie that around the trees, and it makes noise whenever it flaps in the wind, and it reflects light. So they don't like that. Aerial predators like hawks, they don't like that. And then also I've seen people use old CDs. So just take old CDs and tie them with like fishing string and tie them in the trees. And it's the same idea. That reflection, that movement kind of makes them think, oh, maybe this isn't an easy target. There may be something there that I'm not sure about, so I'm going to kind of stay back. Anything to make it harder for them is going to be a plus, guys. Anything that means this is not an easy meal is going to go a long way toward deterring predators. Another thing is these things called night guard. We started using these when we lived in Florence, and we've used them off and on ever since. They are these tiny little square things, and they are solar powered, and you can hang them. You can hang them anywhere, on a tree, on a little post or whatever. and you can point it toward, we usually try to like point it toward the woods. And at night, it blinks like this red light, just like on and off. And the whole idea behind that is that it mimics kind of the eye shine of a predator. And so if a predator is trying to come to your place and they think someone's already there, they're not gonna, like, they're not ready to fight for a meal. They want something simple. So a lot of times that kind of can help deter them and kind of lead them out of your area. Obviously, if you've got things like game cameras, motion detectors, cameras, lights, any of those things are going to be great. If you have access to them, if you can hook them up, depending on how far out your place, your animals are from your place, that's all something to, consider. Lock up your animals at night. Make sure everybody's tucked away where they're supposed to be and where you're comfortable with them being. And then here's another one that may sound a little crazy to you, especially if you only have a smaller flock in one area. You're going to think I'm crazy when I say this. But keep a watch on your numbers. If you're running larger flocks, or especially if you're running more than one flock, like I do, I have like 3 chicken coops, really 4 right now. And from time to time, I'll know like how many chickens are supposed to be in one coop. But whoever's missing, I can go, and for some reason, they've gotten this idea that night to go to another coop. Okay, they made some new friends or something, and they wanted to go hang out with them and have a spend the night party in a different chicken coop. And so I can go find them in there. But now, if that chicken is used to doing that, and all of a sudden that chicken comes up missing, and I'm like, oh, she's just probably gone over to the other coop. And I do that like 3 days in a row, and I've lost 3 chickens before I realize, oh no, you've got a predator picking these things off, and you just haven't noticed. And so keep a watch on your numbers. When you get a larger flock, it is easy for you to miscount, or, one slip by you, or you think they had to spend a night party somewhere else. And so you got to just kind of keep an eye on that. That's just something to be mindful of. Whenever it comes to larger animals, talked about locking up chickens and things like that with your larger animals. Something to consider is electric fencing. A lot of people run electric across the top of like standard fencing to help deter things from climbing over, things like that. We personally use electric netting fencing, Premier One, with everything that we have around here. So our goats, our pigs, they're all in electric netting. Our meat birds, when we move them out of the barn, will be in electric netting. That's just something that we do. It's easy to move so that if we need that space for something else later, we don't have a permanent fence on that place. We can move it because we are on a smaller acreage. It lends itself to being more versatile. It's not without having those static fences. We're able to do more on our place. So we use it for several reasons, but it is a nice thing to have when you consider it's going to pop anything that tries to get in it. And you can control, you can choose how big you want the grids to be. So when we have baby goats, for example, I put them in poultry netting, which is much smaller, grid, so that something can't climb in and they can't get out to be susceptible to predators. So we really like that. We use it. You need to keep it tested. You got to keep an eye on it, making sure it's working appropriately. Or your animals may try to get out, or other things that may get in. So it is a responsibility. It's just like anything else. You got to keep an eye on your fences, but we do like the Premier One electric netting, and we use their chargers and their fencing all around here. Livestock guardian dogs is not something I personally have. I can't speak on it as far as where to find it, how to find it, all the things. But just know there is a difference between a livestock guardian dog and just a dog who can be around livestock. I have one of those. We have 3 dogs. So one likes to kill chickens. The other one is amazing and patrols the place and is out off and on during the day and night. And she sleeps inside, but she's always kind of walking and checking and will let us know if something's out here. An actual livestock guardian is going to do your work as far as, living with your livestock. Usually they'll live with your herd or your flock, and they protect them from the inside. And they are usually a specific breed. Around here you see lots of Great Pyrenees, Anatolians, depending on your location. You may have different kinds, but anyway, and usually they come from working dogs. They come from a long line of dogs that have done this forever. And once they've been trained, they can live with your livestock. And they're great to have. We just personally have never... That's just not something that we've ever taken on. All right. So now finally, in closing, the best prevention is knowing your land. Walk your place, know your place, use your place, because whenever the place is you're making noise, you're leaving you're tracking your footprints through, that leaves a scent, that leaves sign that you were there. All of those things, predators are like, okay, that's not really my territory. They're still going to try to come, but that is a really good way to deter them. And it's funny because it's something that we've always noticed. And actually, a couple of months ago, my husband pointed out that what in the world is that? Okay, I'm sorry. My husband's pulling something across the yard. Okay. Anyway, we've always kind of noticed, just from our own experience, that the more you can be active on your place, the more you utilize it, the better you know it, the more likely you are to kind of stave off any encroaching predators. And then my husband pointed out to me a couple months ago that it's actually, God actually says it kind of sort of in scripture. And just bear with me here. In Exodus 23, God is speaking to Moses and the Israelites. Now at this point, the Israelites they were enslaved people in Egypt. They left. They were able to leave. They went into the desert and ended up being 40 years before they finally were able to get to the promised land. Moses was leading them during this time. They had not gotten where they were going yet, but God was talking to them about the land that they were going to inherit someday. And he was talking about the land they may inhabit in the future. And this is actually the same chapter where he actually talks about like planting your vineyards for 6 years and then letting your land rest on the 7th. So there's several little kind of stewardship things he outlines in this chapter, which I find really cool. But he literally, in verses 29 through 30, the Bible says, this is God speaking, and he says, I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Now, God's talking about, I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, them being the people who currently inhabit this land. So this land is inhabited by someone else. And God says, I'll not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little, I will drive them out before you until you have increased and you inherit the land. So he basically said, I'm not going to open this whole thing up to you at one time, because the wild beasts will take over and the land will become desolate. Instead, I'm going to wait until your number, like gradually give you this land so that you can inhabit it little by little until you have a large enough number to take care of it. And so, like, even in scripture, as far back as the Old Testament, God himself understood animals will take over land if it isn't used or inhabited. That's just the way of the world. That's just the way of the land. It's the way God made us all. So I thought that was pretty cool. All right. So we covered predators. I pray you guys never have terrible problems with predators. If you do, I hope you're very swiftly able to deal with it and recover from it. I know it's not easy to ever lose anything that we spend time and money and effort taking care of, and that we're stewards of. We want to take as good care of everything as possible, but sometimes losses do happen. Predators do come in. They're just trying to get a meal, but we have to do what we can to protect the things we're taking care of. So I think that's about all I got to say today. As usual, the whole spiel. Find me on Wednesdays on Wally Media Group on YouTube. On Sundays, I'll upload, that's at 7 o'clock Central, on Wednesdays. On Sundays, I'll upload audio to like podcast platforms, and also the website inkandoveralls.com has a podcast like tab there, and you hit that, you can see all like audio to all the podcasts that we've had so far. You can catch up if you're behind. And also from there you can link to merchandise and like my shop where I sell the things that I make here, herbal salves, tinctures, goat's milk soap, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess that's about it. I appreciate you so much. If you've hung in this long, especially, you're a rock star. And I hope that you've learned something, and maybe your place will be more protected from now on from whatever may come your way. And if not, we're going to keep going, and it's going to be okay, because we're doing the best we can. Let's just do the best we can. And yeah, so until next time, I hope you find the beauty wherever you are, and I hope you'll have an awesome day. Thanks.